Hello, my bookish friends. Welcome to me tier ranking popular BookTok books. I'm so excited for this video and I've never done this before, so that's really exciting. I've definitely read a good amount of popular BookTok books because that was kind of how I got back into reading. Always been a reader, but definitely once BookTok came about, I was obsessed. So I've read a good amount and these are not all of the BookTok books that I have read. There's definitely a lot more, but we're gonna start off with this bunch because I think this is a good amount and then I can always do a part 2 if needed. But let's just jump right into it. I have quite a bit of range. I feel like I have a lot of different genres. There's a lot of romance, some fantasy, literary fiction, magical realism, yeah, and stuff like that. Let's just jump right in. Let me talk about the tiers that I have. The first one being changed my reading life, altered brain chemistry. So this is like a 5-star read, one that it changed my brain chemistry. I'm not the same after reading that book. Second one is definitely recommend, deserves the hype. It's about a 4, so it's very popular. I can see why. 3, enjoyable but forgettable. Second to last tier is It Was I, so it's like a 2. Like, it would have been great if I probably didn't read this book and it was like, okay. And then the last tier is not a fan, TBH, why is this popular? So I don't know if I'm gonna have any books in that tier, but I guess we'll see. That's like a 1, and I don't think I ever rate books 1, because if I think a book is gonna be a 1, I might as well not read it. Let's begin with the first one being Happy Place by Emily Henry. This is a hugely popular book and I definitely remember seeing it all over BookTok. I'm gonna go with def recommend, deserves the hype. I don't think it changed my brain chemistry, but it was definitely a good book. This is my favorite Emily Henry book. It was like a 4.5 star for me, and I definitely see why it's popular. It's marketed as romance and it definitely is that, but the reason I loved this book so much was because it was more than just like a partner romance. It was like a friendship type of love. There's like family love. There's all sorts of different love relationships in this book that I really enjoyed. So that's why I liked it, and I can see why it's really popular. In my opinion, it does deserve the hype that it has. Next up is Verity. This is a Colleen Hoover book, and this one is like not way old, but this is like 2020, 2021, really popular BookTok book. It was, I think, the first or second Colleen Hoover book that I ever read. And yeah, I'm gonna go with the same tier. Definitely recommend, it deserves the hype. I remember when I first picked this book up, the first line is super like engaging. Like from there, I was hooked. Something about like a girl seeing a guy get run over in the street and blood splattering everywhere. Like, what? How do you start off a book like that? That is unhinged. Definitely was really enjoyable. It's kind of like a thriller mystery, but in my opinion, it's almost like horror-y. Not in like a scary sense, but in like a chilling way. Like, you just feel very unsettled reading the entire thing. The ending is crazy. It deserves the hype. It's a really good book, in my opinion. Third one, Icebreaker. Now this one's more of a newer one. I'm conflicted. For me, it kind of falls between def recommend and enjoyable but forgettable. I'm gonna go with enjoyable but forgettable, but in my opinion, I really enjoyed it. I definitely recommend it, but does it deserve all the hype? I don't know. I think it's a pretty solid romance. I definitely enjoyed it, but it's nothing too crazy. Like, it's just a spicy sports romance. I don't think it deserves the hype that it's like crazy popular. I don't know why it blew up the way it did, but I can see it just being kind of like another one of those books at Barnes & Noble that I'll like walk past. But I did enjoy it, if that makes sense. So I'm just gonna keep it there for now. The Guncle, this one I read a while ago too, and this one, very popular. I'm gonna go with enjoyable but forgettable. In the moment when I was reading this book, I did really enjoy it, but I feel like I don't ever think about this book. I see it get recommended a lot and I'll think back to it and be like, oh yeah, it was good, but I don't ever think about it if I'm not like actively seeing it somewhere. You know what I mean? So I'm gonna leave it there, and I think that sits right with me. Project Hail Mary. This one is gonna go def recommend, deserves the hype. This is kind of like a sci-fi, and there's a lot of like math and physics, and I am not the girl for math and physics. Like, I hate that. But this book did it well. Like, I'm ranking it up pretty high, and for it to have like as much physics and math and sci-fi talk that it did, it still did it really well. The ending was great, the character development was great, the plot was great. Like, it was just so entertaining, and I think this one is one that can engage a large range of readers. Like, I'm pretty romance, literary fiction type of reader, but I recommend this to my boyfriend and I want him to read it. He is an engineer, so he does have more of like that math brain, and I think he would love this book. So I love that about that book, is that it can be a really good recommendation for like anybody. So that's why I think it deserves the hype, is because anybody can pick it up and love it. Next up is The Summer I Turned Pretty. I'm honestly gonna go with not a fan. Why is this popular? I don't know if that's like an unpopular opinion, but this book, I just did not find myself in a good mood when I was reading it. I don't think the main character, Belly, is like, I just didn't like her. She was like kind of annoying and mean. And I just think if you're a main character and I don't like you, like, why am I reading this book? I like went maybe 40 pages into the second book and just like put the series down because I was not enjoying it. It was not my favorite thing ever. The series is good. I only watched like 2 episodes, but like, I don't know. It is YA and I'm not the biggest reader or fan of YA, so maybe that's what it was, but yeah, I'm not a fan, and I have the entire series, but quite frankly, I don't know if I will ever read it all because I just have no desire to. Why is this popular? I'm sure there's other YA series that are better. Like, I don't know. I don't know why this book blew up. Maybe if I was in high school, I would have ate this up. So maybe that's why, but at this point, I would not recommend it to anybody, and I will actively tell you why I do not like this series. Sorry. Next up is The Love Hypothesis. This one is like special because this was a really popular read back in the day, like 2021, 2022. This one again is another romance that blew up. I'm between these two for sure. I think I want to put it in enjoyable but forgettable because, to be honest, I don't remember like the details of it. I know it's like a spicy STEM romance, enemies to lovers, but other than that, like I could not tell you what else it's about. I think at the time it came up, it was a great time for it because it was like right when like people were getting into reading, and this is like a spicy romance, and it's a well-written romance in its defense, but I don't ever think about it. I would recommend it, but it's like, I don't know, you know? Does it deserve the hype? Kind of. That's why I'm a little iffy, so I'm just gonna go with enjoyable but forgettable because I feel like that just sits right with me. I do remember really liking it, and like I think chapter 16 is really spicy, so you know, I own it. Literally, I own the book, so I did like it, but I think it's okay where it's at. I'm not mad at it at all. Next up, It Happened One Summer. This one I remember reading like digitally. I don't even own it. I'm gonna go with the same rank. Enjoyable but forgettable. It's not the best romance I've ever read. It's just kind of there. It's another spicy romance, like enemies to lovers, I think too. So it kind of just falls into that same umbrella as The Love Hypothesis. I can see why it blew up, but do I think it deserves to be like crazy hyped up and like highly rated as compared to like other enemies to lovers romances? No. I read the first book, there's like a little series in it because it's about this girl named Hannah and her sister, and I think the second book is mostly based on her sister's like relationship, but I didn't even continue the series because I think I'm good. It was like a one and done. It was a good read in the moment. I enjoyed it. It was great, but do I see myself like reaching for that? No. So I think it also fits well there. I'm gonna leave it where it is. The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I am not gonna lie, this changed my reading life. Like, this was also one of those first books that I reached to read after like not reading for a while, and I just remember it being really, really good. It did have some slower parts, and I can see the criticisms, and I see like the negative reviews of people saying that it was like boring and whatnot, and I could see that, but I still think the book overall was really, really good. I don't know what I rated it at the time that I read it, but I do think it's a 5-star because I think about it and it's like a nostalgic 5-star, if that makes sense. I think it's really well written. It's more of like a literary fiction type book, but it has like a romance subplot, and it's obviously about 7 husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I think it's fun. It was cool in the moment, and I enjoyed it. It altered my brain chemistry. This is the first book that I read from Taylor Jenkins Reid, and since then I've read almost every single one of her books. I think I'm missing 1 or 2. It's up there for me just because of that. Like, thank you, 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, for introducing me to one of my favorite authors, Taylor Jenkins Reid, and it would not have happened without 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. That is also a monumental book for like BookTok and the bookstagram booktube community, I feel like. So because of that, it deserves to be up there for sure. Next book. Archer's Voice. That's definitely going to change my reading life, and it for sure altered my brain chemistry. This is one of my favorite romances in the entire world. And by the time I read this, I was a little late to reading this. I read this maybe like last year, and this was definitely super popular again in like 2020, 2021, but I was a bit late to reading it. I was like, I think it's the cover. Like, I don't love the cover, so I was like, whatever. But I kept seeing people talk about it, so of course I picked it up. And this book is so tender. It is one of my favorite romances because it's just so tender. That's how I would describe it. It's such a comforting read. There are some like pretty tough shit that's like talked about in the book, and it's like sad, but I loved the like complexities of this book. There's like ups and downs in this book, and I really, really enjoyed that. I love the two main characters. It's set in a small town. Oh, I just love this book and I want to reread it. When I read it, it was a 5-star for me, and I think I shed some tears. That's how you know like that book is good. It's so good, and I just want to reread it because it altered my brain chemistry. It is such a solid romance, and I definitely think, like, compared to The Love Hypothesis or Icebreaker, It Happened One Summer, I can see why this one is just has more to it than just like a typical romance. If you guys have not read Archer's Voice, please read it, because if you are a romance lover, you have to read Archer's Voice. I think you will really enjoy it. It's one of my favorite books, and I will probably never stop talking about it. Next up is The Dead Romantics. I'm gonna go with It Was I read this one in 2022 because I remember exactly where I was, and it just kind of fell flat for me. It's like it's like a romance, but there's also like dead people, or this girl has like a sixth sense basically and like can feel dead people. I don't know. I see like why people love this book, because it definitely had like the bones to be really good, but I feel like for me overall it just fell flat. It wasn't anything crazy. I wouldn't recommend it. I do not ever think about it, and like I mentioned, I remember once I finished it, I was kind of like, I felt very neutral. Wasn't like, oh my gosh, or wasn't like sad. I wasn't anything. I was just kind of like, okay, like I don't know. And which just sucks, because this author, I think it's Ashley Poston, is the author of The Dead Romantics. She is the author of The 7-Year Slip, which in the moment is super, super popular, but I do not want to pick it up just because of, I did not love The Dead Romantics. It was like, it was Ike for me. So I'm like, I don't want to fall into the trap of reading it because of FOMO and then not even liking it. So that's why I've definitely pushed off The 7-Year Slip. I know she has a new book coming out this year, I believe. And again, it's super, already see it everywhere. But I just don't think I'm going to reach for it. I don't think I'm going to read it because The Dead Romantics to me just fell so flat. And I don't think I'm the only one out there, so hopefully this is semi-relatable, but it wasn't anything crazy for me. It was whatever. So I wouldn't even recommend it, to be honest. Moving on. The Book Thief. This book, again, I'm even scared putting it in that tier. It was because this book is so well loved, and it's like almost not a classic, but almost. It's like one of those like modern classics. But for me, when I read it, I kind of was waiting for the other shoe to drop. And I don't know if it's because I love books that will tear your heart out, but this one just didn't do it for me. It was good in the moment. I remember like feeling a certain way, but there were just like dual timelines, I think, and it just wasn't my favorite World War II book ever. This is a World War II historical fiction, and I've read other ones that I have absolutely loved. This one I feel like I'm in the minority, and definitely an unpopular opinion because this book is so highly rated, but for me it just was not my favorite, and by the time I was finished with it, I was like, okay, that's it. The House in the Cerulean Sea. It deserves the hype. That book is good. It's like a magical realism, contemporary fiction type of book. This one, it falls into a very special category for me. There's other books in that same category in the list that I will bring up and like talk about, but this one is definitely, it was good. It's about a social worker. So this one, if you work with kids, if you're a teacher, a social worker, any sort of work that deals with kids, you have to read this book because it is so heartwarming, and it's a journey. It's definitely a journey. It was so good. It's tender. It will make you cry. It's emotional. It was so good. I do want to reread this book, and it deserves the hype because I think it is so well written. The plot is fun, but it's also emotional. Definitely recommend. It's about a social worker, but he works with like magical kids or kids who have like superpowers in an orphanage. It is just, I've recommended this to any and everyone who work with kids because I think you would really, really enjoy it. If you don't work with kids, I still think you would enjoy it, but I think it would hit harder for the people who do work with kids because it's about a social worker working with kids. It deserves the hype, and I definitely recommend that book. Remarkably Bright Creatures is another book that I'm gonna throw up here with def recommend deserves the hype. Actually, I'm in between, but I'm gonna put it in the same realm as, or the same tier as The House in the Cerulean Sea. Like I mentioned, it's kind of magical realism. This is one of those books that I think if you like The House in the Cerulean Sea, you would like Remarkably Bright Creatures, and vice versa, because they're very similar in that sense of like the genre that they're in. I would say I like The House in the Cerulean Sea better than Remarkably Bright Creatures, but I enjoyed both at the time, and Remarkably Bright Creatures is still a really good book. Deserves the hype. That's I guess where I'm like, it's a good book. I'll leave it up there. I had a fun time reading it. I recommend it. I'm gonna be nice to it. So, because again, it's in that special little genre that I think is so like, it's just a comforting genre. So that's why I'm gonna leave it in that tier. And it is a good book. I did enjoy it. It's about like a talking octopus, so it's definitely fiction. If you can wrap your head around that, you would definitely enjoy this book. It's about like a talking octopus who lives in an aquarium, and he's like getting old, again, set in a small town. And I think just the plot was really good. It's unique, but it was really good. And it like, I just remember by the end of it, I was like, this was tied up really well. Like it went full circle for me, and I appreciate that. So I'm gonna leave it in that tier. It Ends With Us changed my reading life, altered brain chemistry. When I read this book, funny story, I read this book on Valentine's Day because I thought it was romance, and it is, but there's something else about it. My camera was overheating, so I had to take a quick break. Hopefully nothing changed too much, but let's just jump right back in. On to the next book. It is My Dark Vanessa. Now this one, in the moment, I did not rate it 5 stars, but I'm gonna throw it up in the top tier. It changed my reading life, it altered my brain chemistry. Now this book is a book about a like 15-year-old girl who gets in a relationship with like her 40-year-old plus professor. And yeah, it's dark, it's pretty haunting, and it's very hard to read. I remember when I was reading this book, I literally had to take breaks because I just felt it so viscerally, like I just could not keep going. So I would have to take breaks, and for a book to do that to you, that's a damn well written book in my opinion. Like that's something, right? It's special. So I'm gonna throw it up there because it did alter my brain chemistry. It's very dark. Check trigger warnings if you want to even think about reading that book, because it is, like I said, very haunting and hard to read. But I still think about that book like to this day, and I think about it all the time. That's when you know a book is good, right? So that's why I'm definitely throwing it up there, because it changed me. A Little Life. I finished this one last month, so it's very new in my head, and it's right up there as well with all these books. Changed my reading life, altered my brain chemistry. And if you notice, My Dark Vanessa and A Little Life have very similar covers. Yeah. A Little Life is also extremely hard to read. It's so heavy. Let me explain. It's a book about 4 guys who, it follows them their entire life. We first meet them when they're in college, and it follows them their entire life, but it centers on one of them mostly as like the main character, and his name is Jude. And Jude suffers from like childhood trauma, and it's a beautifully written book about how trauma seeps into every fiber of your being, how it affects you to your core, how it affects your relationships, your friendships, everything. And it's super, super hard to read. So that's why like it's hard to recommend because of that. But for me, I'm glad I read it. I think I'm a better reader because of it, and it definitely altered my brain chemistry, and I will forever keep the book. It is in my library in here somewhere, but it was such a good book that it definitely changed my reading life. Well, actually, when I named that tier Changed My Reading Life, I thought about A Little Life, because that's just how special it is. Next up, Every Summer After. This one, I'm gonna go with, it's between these 2 tiers, enjoyable but forgettable. Definitely recommend. I'm gonna guess, I'm gonna put it in enjoyable but forgettable. Oh, you know what I have not been doing is, I know when people do this video, they'll like order them within the tiers. This one is like in the front of this tier because it's a romance. It's like childhood friends to lovers, I think. And it's just really good. I just remember in the moment when I was reading that one, I really, really enjoyed it more than these other romances. Now, I don't think it deserves the crazy hype that it got because, again, it's just not a romance that had like changed my life. But I just remember when I was reading it, it was definitely enjoyable. So this one is like literally in between these 2 tiers. That's why I'm gonna put it like number 1 in this tier because I thought it was really, really good. It's a little forgettable because I don't remember every single thing that happened. I just remember how I felt when I was reading it and I enjoyed it. Part of Your World. Now, I'm not gonna lie. Yikes, I know this one might also be an unpopular opinion because It was like okay. I mean, it was good. It wasn't just it was good, and I would recommend it. But to me, it's not the best Abby Jimenez book I've read. I think I've read 4 Abby Jimenez books at this point, and this Part of Your World is probably my fourth favorite in my opinion. The first 3 are her little interconnected standalone series, which is The Friend Zone, The Happy Ever After Playlist, and Life's Too Short. Love those books more than Part of Your World, I think. I still think it was good and it's an enjoyable book and I would recommend it, but I don't think it deserves the hype that it has just because I think there are better romance books out there. But still, Abby Jimenez is one of my favorite authors and I still thought it was good, but it is a little forgettable for me because I don't ever think about that book. Love and Other Words by Christina Lauren. It changed my reading life, altered my brain chemistry. This is a 5-star romance read for me. Again, it's a romance book, but it has depth to it, which I enjoy. I just remember by the end of this book, I was like holding back tears because it can get really emotional. This is a dual POV book where it's like the girl character and the male character. And I think it might be even dual timeline too. I haven't read this book in a long time. I read this when it was like OG. So it's been a few years and I would reread it because like I mentioned, it's a 5-star read for me. So this is one of my favorite romance books. I think it's really good. It's really special. It's such good romance. And like I said, there's more to it. There's some depth. And I love this one specifically too because it is childhood friends to lovers. And I love that trope. That is one of my favorite romance tropes. And the characters love reading. And I love books that talk about reading because I love to read. So it just makes me happy. The Silent Patient is gonna go top tier also because this is one of the first like thrillers that I read when I was getting back into reading and it's a top tier book. The plot twists are crazy, like you do not see it coming, and I just remember reading it, loving it. Again, this isn't a nostalgic like full 5-star read for me, so that's why it's gonna go top tier because it has such nostalgia like tied to it. But I still thought it was a really, really good thriller and I always recommend this book. If you're like thinking about reading a thriller mystery, I recommend this one. And I've gotten really good feedback on people and friends who I have recommended it to, so it deserves the hype and it changed my reading life because it's such a good thriller. Circe, that's how I called this book when I would read it, and then I would watch TikToks and it was called Circe, I guess. This one, I'm not gonna be mean and put it in the last tier, but I am gonna put it in the it was Ike tier. But the reason why I'm not putting it in why is it so popular is because I think I'm the problem with this book. It's a Greek mythology book and that's not me. That is not me. So I forced myself to read it and gave it like 2 stars because it took me so long to read. But again, I think I'm the problem in this situation and I'm just not a Greek mythology type girl. This one is so highly rated. So yeah, I'm not gonna recommend it because I don't love Greek mythology and I wouldn't recommend something that I struggled to finish. But if you like Greek mythology, this is a really popular book. So I don't know, give it a shot. Fourth Wing, I'm gonna give it, now this book is a little too overrated, so I like fear putting it here because like deserves the hype. I don't think any book deserves the hype that this book has, but it was really good and I rated it 4.5 stars. It's a fantasy with like a romance subplot, and this is one of, I don't ever really read fantasy, but I read this one and I really enjoyed it and I really liked it. So I'm gonna leave it there. I would recommend it and I just haven't read the second book, but I do like it. Yeah, it was good. I'll leave it in that tier. It feels okay. Lessons in Chemistry. This was like the book of the year for Barnes & Noble in 2023 and I read it because of that and it was good. It's about like a woman in science and it takes place, it's like a historical fiction, so it takes place in a time when like women were expected to just sit down and be in the kitchen and, you know, be a homemaker and all that, but this one kind of takes a spin on it and she's a really, really brilliant woman. But it just felt kind of flat for me. It was a little boring at times, so that's why it just was for me. I love the like thought and the plot of this book, but it just for me wasn't that well executed, or I didn't love it. Maybe if it was written in a different style, I would have loved it more, but you know, you're not gonna love every book you read, and that's okay. Magnolia Parks. Yeah. Magnolia Parks. I 50% hated it, 50% loved it. I always say that when I talk about this book because that is how I genuinely felt. I went into this book thinking I'm gonna love it, it's gonna be a 5-star read, but once I finished it, I was like, what the hell happened? Nothing. It was very weird. It's like a Gossip Girl, London-based type of book, so obviously it sounds interesting, that's why I read it. I am on book 3 in the series, so I did continue the series, but with that being said, maybe start the series and at least get to the second book because the second book is Daisy Hates and she's like one of my favorite characters ever now. It was enjoyable. It's a little forgettable, but I continued the series because I love Daisy Hates. The last one being The Housemaid. This book, I'm I'm gonna put it in It Was I, and here's why. It's a really good thriller romance, or not thriller romance, thriller mystery, but I think I don't think it deserves the hype. I've read a lot of thriller mysteries at this point, and by the time I read this book, I had read a lot of thriller mysteries, and it was good, it was solid, but it's not the best one I've ever read, so I don't know why it got so popular. It is good, and I would recommend it, but it's almost like a starter thriller mystery for me. Like, I would recommend it to someone who has never really dabbled in that genre. I don't think it's like deserves the hype, quite frankly, but I do recommend it. And it was because like I read it and I thought it was good, but it's not the best thriller mystery I've ever read. It could go in enjoyable but forgettable, because I did enjoy it, but I'm gonna just go with It Was I, just because it was you know? And I did continue the series. It has like another series, and the second book I liked more, so there is that. We're done. Those are all of the books, the popular book talk books that I'm gonna rank today, and here's my final ratings. Now, if you take anything away from this video, it's this top tier. Read these. These are worth reading. These are great book talk books that I think deserve the hype. They'll change your brain chemistry if you've read this. And even these top 2 tiers, definitely I recommend. They're both really good in my opinion, and they were just, I recommend them. These bottom 3 you could probably do without, but if you're like me and you get FOMO, you're gonna wanna read them. So, you know, do with that what you will. Do with this information what you will. But I had so much fun, and maybe there's so many popular book talk books, so maybe there's a part 2 coming, who knows? But I'm like literally losing my voice because I've been talking for like 20-30 minutes straight. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, give it a thumbs up and maybe comment like some other popular book talk books, so next time I do this video I'll have some recommendations. Thank you so much. Bye friends.